Hello, you are listening to the RXConnect podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the American Oncology Network. I am your host, Melody Chang, Vice President of Pharmacy Operations at the American Oncology Network. Today, we're excited to bring you a topic that continues to challenge all of us in oncology: drug shortages, and more importantly, what we can actually do about them. I'm really pleased to be joined by two incredible leaders who have been on the front lines of navigating these challenges in real time. Manale Maksour, Clinical Pharmacy Service Manager, and Susan Sabo-Wagner, Vice President of Clinical Innovation at American Oncology Network. Thank you both for being here. So first of all, I would like to have Manel and Susan, you both give us an introductions to our audience. What is your role, the organizations, and what the background of you? Would you please, Manel?
Yeah, thank you, Melody. Great to be here with you and Susan. I'm Manale Maksour. I'm the Clinical Pharmacy Services Manager. I've been with Aon for over 3 years now. I started as the West Regional Clinical Pharmacist and then moved into my role. I have over 20 years of experience in the pharmacy field, and currently I lead a team of regional clinical pharmacists that serve all the Aon clinics. They help with therapeutic substitutions, PNT initiatives, and all IV related drugs consults.
Thank you, Manel. And next, Susan, would you please give our audience an introductions about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Melody. It's also great to be here with you and Manal. So, I am the Vice President of Clinical Innovation, as you said, and I oversee nursing operations for Aon. And I also see a centralized care coordination team of nurses and value based care, non clinical staff that support our network practices. And I also have a registered dietitian team. My background is nursing, and I have also been in the field for almost 30 years. And I have mostly been in community oncology, and I'm very excited to speak to you today.
Thank you both. And our audience that listen to what they're just give their introductions. They both have over 20, 30 years experience, but I guarantee you when you see them in person, they look very, very young. Uh, doesn't like they have been on the fields for 20, 30 decades. All right, so let's start with the big picture, drug shortages. The drug shortages, surprisingly, is not a new concept, but recently they feel more disruptive and hard to manage. So, from your perspective, how are these shortages impacting the community oncology practices today? I'll start with Manel.
Yeah, Melody, this is actually an ongoing issue. And since 2010, I want to say we've seen an increase in drug shortages, and especially the ones that affect chemotherapy. That's what we see in our community oncology. The reason are various. We've seen some related to natural disasters and some just related, like right now, the carboplatin shortage is related to raw material price increase. Unfortunately, in oncology, we do not always have other pathways, and it does affect the patient and the treatment. And literally, I mean, some of these are usually for curative intent, and we have to act quickly to remedy this. So it does make it challenging. And we do not see any resolution anytime soon. So it is an ongoing problem, and we do need to literally, be on the lookout all the time and have strategies that are in place and be more proactive than reactive when we can.
Yeah, totally agreed. And I know we actually started this podcast 2 years ago just because we try to understand and educate our providers and then our clinical staff what the drug shortages impact the community practice. So the first episode that we started actually was 2 years ago was a target on drug shortage, and we did a series episode just target on this subject. I cannot believe just 2 years and this coming back again. So Susan, I believe during the 30 years of your career, you probably experienced the drug shortages as well many, many times, just like in circle.
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, it's no longer, a temporary disruption. They're really part of our daily operating environment. And especially in community oncology, it creates challenges, really at every level of the care delivery. Excuse me. And what makes this really especially difficult is, these shortages really disproportionately affect sterile injectables and chemotherapy agents, which are some of the most essential drugs that we use for our patients. So when the supply is unstable,
Mhm.
practices are forced to constantly adjust. And, that means updating treatment workflows, revising our EHR building regimens and order sets, and, constantly communicating changes to providers and nurses and staff. And, we have to make sure that our patients also understand why something in their treatment plan may look different than they expected or than it used to. And of course, that's the most important impact is on our patients. Shortages lead to treatment delays, regimen modifications, and so much anxiety for our patients who are already dealing with so much. So from an operational standpoint, it's really it's exhausting. And from a patient care standpoint, it's unacceptable.
Yeah, yeah. It's very sad to see the patients that they have to deal with the uh, devastating disease. At the same time, they have to face the reality there's no drugs for the treatment for them. So, Manal, you mentioned about a couple of it caused a reason driving this shortages. And this time we see a couple of drugs are in short. And then do we know what's the reason behind that?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Melody. So the platinum right now are in shortage. We're talking carboplatin, cisplatin, oxaliplatin. These are oncology drugs that are, I don't want to say ancient, but they've been on the market for a very long time. And they are manufactured using platinum, which is a mineral. And it is right now the price increased significantly of this precious metal. Uh, that is the reason why a lot of manufacturer, especially the generic ones, do not see any financial benefit in buying the platinum and manufacturing the all those carboplatin, cisplatin, oxaliplatin, and it kind of did result uh, in the shortage. It was all of a sudden, and one day we just know we are on allocation. There was no pre news, anything that told us this is going to happen. So that's why we had to act quickly and find ways to deal with it. This is not the first time platinums go on shortage, but the good news is that right now we do have better alternatives, and we were able to mitigate this at Aon.
Okay, wonderful. So we hear there's an alternative. So let's talk about the alternative. I know one concept that's getting more attention lately is the 505(b)(2) pathway. Is that what you're referring to as an alternative?
Yes, that is correct. So the 505(b)(2) products, I can just quickly introduce what these are because it's still a new pathway that a lot of our listeners probably haven't heard of or just briefly heard of but don't know what it is. It's getting more attention lately, especially in the light of the shortage. So, what it is a FDA approval pathway that is more of a hybrid approval. So it allows manufacturer to build on the existing clinical data for a reference product, which is right now a generic, rather than starting completely from scratch like they do with a new drug. So, what makes these products interesting is that it's not like a copy of that generic, but they do introduce improvements. Usually, it's a change in the drug form, like, for example, from powder that needs reconstitution to liquid that's ready to be diluted. Sometimes the stability is enhanced. So, this what makes it not a generic and definitely not interchangeable. They also have a different billing code. But with these 505(b)(2)s, we have now more options, especially with in the drug shortage that we are seeing right now.
Great. Thank you for the very informative background of the 505(b)(2) drugs. I think that's an important point. These are not just copies of existing drugs, right? They often come with the meaningful differences that can impact how we use them operationally. So let's talk about the practical side. In the middle of the shortage, how do this product actually help us? Can I start with Manal?
Yeah, so they actually offer an alternative. For example, talking about the carboplatin shortage, Kixara is a 505(b)(2), and usually these drugs have better financial incentive. They are in general more expensive, but that also gives the manufacturer some room to kind of buy these platinums, the raw material that's already very expensive to generic. They can actually afford it and keep manufacturing. So, in the carboplatin shortage example that we are living right now, we were able to actually substitute to Kixara, which is the 505(b)(2) we were talking about, and mitigate the shortage. So patients did not actually feel that their treatments were delayed or the doses were, rounded down or any of that. Just because we have this alternative right now, a new manufacturer with a product that is not affected by the price of the raw material.
Mhm. That's a good news. So we have alternative. But since you brought up the price and the cost of the drugs are probably more expensive than just a pure generic, would that impact the patient's out-of-pocket cost? If that's the case, will the manufacturer provide any support to the patient? Do you know if there's any support system or
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
So, the manufacturer are very aware of the drug cost and then the impact on the patient out of pocket. That's why they do have a wonderful patient access program usually. They do help patients with the out of pocket. So it's at no cost to the patient or minimal cost. Because the last thing anyone wants to do is pass on this financial toxicity to patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that all sounds promising. But as we know, nothing is ever completely straightforward. So, what are some of the challenges or practices still need to be aware of when incorporating 505(b)(2) products? May I ask Susan?
Sure. So 505(b)(2) products, are incredibly useful for practices. But they're not a simple generic swap like some of the other, biosimilars or generics. The acquisition cost, like Manal said, is a bit higher for some of them. And reimbursement requires a little bit of closer attention. And then the implementation takes work across pharmacy and providers, nursing, and the EHR. So the question really isn't whether the product costs more. That's just one piece of it. But the question is whether it helps the practices preserve access, reduce the disruption to patients, and really manage that scarce inventory more strategically. And a lot of times the answer to that is really clearly yes, but it does take planning. Oftentimes these drugs, most of the time, these drugs have different J codes. And so that swap is something that you have to reauthorize. And so you have to really plan for that. And so being proactive, and I think Manal mentioned that early, being proactive is really the best case scenario to adopt this pattern and adopt this line of therapy. It's not just a plug and play therapy. You need to really build a strategy behind it.
Great. Yeah, I really liked the point. They're not plug and play. You really need to alignment, planning, and a clear strategy to use them effectively. And I know currently, we Aon as other organizations, they experience the same thing, have platinum shortage, cargo or cisplatin shortage. So I know Manal and Susan, you both are working very closely pharmacy department and the nursing department are dealing with these challenges all together. Would you please just give us an more a real life example how the organizing approach this shortage currently, and then maybe give other audience they're working for other institutions, and then maybe some example how will be the best practice to deal with this shortage together.
Yeah, so Susan and I already touched a little bit on that. With the current carboplatin shortage, our strategies used to be dose rounding, delaying treatment, even sometimes looking for who's curative, who's palliative, maybe trying to switch treatment of palliative patients to something else, which is not optimal. And, like historically, patients have been really affected with that. The first I've heard about 505(b)(2)s was a few years back, and the idea was these are products that we will actually use during a shortage. And I think this is the first time where we like really see it happening and we see the benefit of these. Luckily, Aon was a early adoptive of 505(b)(2)s, so we do have it in place. We have it in our EMR system. All we had to do is literally switch all our new carboplatin starts to the Kixada. And the regional clinical pharmacist did work with the financial teams at the clinics to push on the payers to approve this. So some payers do not have 505(b)(2)s as preferred. And this is when we typically use a generic carboplatin. But using the ASHP drug shortage newsletter, we were able to push back and get these authorized. So it was definitely a success story to tell. And just to say that because we already were adopting the 505(b)(2), we are familiar with it. We have a process in place. All we had to do is just basically amplify it to all carboplatins and really reserve our allocation to those patients who really need it. And, we have very small payers that would not accept the 505(b)(2). So we were able to reserve our generic carboplatin for these patients.
That's wonderful to hear. A lot of pairs that they actually have a sympathy and then they actually agree due to the shortage situations, we have to think outside the box instead of just follow the formulary they have a step as a standard. They will be very willingly and being flexible during the shortages period time and work together. And then how about Susan? Do you have anything to add?
I just want to emphasize Manal's point about historically how shortages were treated. I don't think that is unique to American Oncology Network and really kind of that sort of quote robbing Peter to pay Paul. There really was no other strategy. And who pays the price for that? The patient does, right? You're shorting them on doses to try to keep up with allocation. And I think it's really critical to understand this is the biggest use case for this 505(b)(2) opportunity, especially as we're hit with these ongoing disruptive shortages. This really is serving patients and being able to preserve the initial drug for those that may not qualify from a payer perspective and ultimately really benefiting the patient the most.
Thank you. Yes, as we look forward, because unfortunately shortages are not going away, and what should practices be doing now to better prepare?
Yeah, I think, just from our experience and because we were already exposed to 505(b)(2)s, it was not a big disruptive change to adopt these. So I would say move more to the proactive, have everything on board, have it in formulary and have processes in line to kind of use it when it's needed. And also, when you diversify your manufacturer, you kind of protect yourself as well when there is a shortage affecting, one manufacturer or more. So definitely, I would say include it in the formulary and have it ready to go, even if it's not a product you would use for every patient. We used to just have 505(b)(2) for specific payers, not for all our patients. But it's already in our system. So all we had to do is just flip the switch. And the Kexata manufacturer was able to help us with this and, confirm that they had enough stock for our increased demand. And we were able to really mitigate this carboplatin shortage with that strategy.
Right. This has been such a valuable discussion. I think one of the biggest takeaways is that while drug shortages are becoming part of our reality in oncology, we do have tools to better manage them. And the 505(b)(2) products are clearly one of those tools when used thoughtfully. Manal, Susan, thank you both for your insight and more importantly, for the work you are doing every day to support practices and patients through these challenges. And thank you to our listeners for joining us today. This podcast is supported by educational funding provided by Avixa Pharmaceutical. We will see you on the next episode of RXConnect.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Melody, and thank you, Susan.
Appreciate it.
The RxConnect podcast is produced by the pharmacy operations team here at American Oncology Network and music composed by the Synth Dude. Make sure to check out all our episodes of the podcast by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel.